Hi, I'm Andy Jones, Content Editor for Plaid's online education program, Let's Paint, and welcome to Color Lessons. Today I'm going to teach you how to paint a still life of pears. We're going to use layers of transparent color to build depth in the pears, and we're also going to teach you a few tricks to create the illusion of reflections. For all of our color lessons, I'm using FolkArt's Pure Artist Pigment paint. It's been specially formulated to be very, very thick so that you can use this for a wide range of painting techniques. We can use it thinned down for transparent watercolor effects, or you can use it with a palette knife for really thick, rich impasto work. The 20 colors of FolkArt Pure Artist Pigments are available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint. And in the set, there is also a great color theory worksheet that is specially coded for you to paint on and reuse if you'd like to. And this is included in the kit with the 20 colors. So this is a great color theory booklet, and we also support this with an online video. I'm also using the FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment Mixing Mat. And this is a great tool to use in place of a palette. It's a reusable silicone mat, and it has spaces to put your colors out around the edge of the palette. Part of it is gray so that you can see exactly what value of colors that you're using. Part of it's white so that you can see how transparent a color is. It also has a quick guide for color harmonies as well as a little vocabulary list so that you can keep yourself familiar with color theory terms. This is a great product, and I think you'll really enjoy using it, and you can use it over and over and over. It cleans off beautifully and does not stain. For all the color lessons, I'm using the FolkArt Select Firm Bristle Brush. These brushes have been designed with a firm bristle synthetic filament, and it is great for canvas painting. It will stand up to lots of abuse. With care and cleaning, these brushes will last you a long, long time. They're perfect for canvas painting as well as any other kind of fabric painting that you're going to do. I think you're really going to love these FolkArt Select Firm Bristle brushes. They're available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint in a package of 7 beautiful brushes. Some of you are concerned that you can't draw. Well, we've got you covered because we're teaching you how to paint, not how to draw. The color lessons come with a package of full color photographs so that you have a complete set of all of the photographs for all of your color lessons paintings. In addition to that, we have full-size pattern sheets. So they're printed out for you so you don't have to enlarge anything, and you can transfer the designs directly to your canvas. So these also are available at plaidonline.com/Let's Paint. I have my canvas on my easel, and I have transferred my design using gray transfer paper, but then I went over the outlines of the pears with just a regular color pencil, and this one happened to be black, but I wanted to darken the outlines of my pears, and also for you to see how I've emphasized that the pears are not smooth and rounded. They're very angular, and we've got, some sharp angles here on the pears, and I want you to keep that in mind while we paint the pears. We're going to begin with the background, and on my palette, I have out yellow ochre, titanium white, and sap green. And I'm going to use my palette knife, and I'm going to mix a nice kind of gold color using yellow ochre and titanium white. So I want to clean my palette knife before I come and pick up some yellow ochre, and then I'm going to mix that in. And when you mix paint with a palette knife, you want to mash the paint and push it back into the puddle. I don't want you to try to stir the paint like that. That doesn't get it mixed up. You need to mash it around and really thoroughly mix the paint together. I want to add just a little bit more yellow ochre to that, so I'm going to clean my palette knife off again, and I'm going to pick up just a little bit more yellow ochre and mix that in. And again, mix the paint thoroughly because you don't want to see streaks of color in your puddle of paint. And once you've mixed your color, then take your palette knife and really push the paint back up into a pile. If you keep your paint pushed into a pile, it's going to stay wet longer. Even though the FolkArt Pure Artist pigments have an extended drying time, keeping the paint together in a puddle really does help it stay wet longer. So in my little bowl, I have FolkArt floating medium, which we're going to use to make the paint move a little bit more and make it a little bit more transparent. And we're going to begin by just dressing our brush in the floating medium, and I'm going to pick up some of this light gold color that I've made, and I want to load the brush thoroughly with the gold paint, and then we're going to come onto the canvas, and again, always holding the brush at the back of the handle so that you are a little bit more relaxed. We're going to begin to apply some of this gold color onto the canvas. And you can see where I can still see my design easily through this paint because I've added the floating medium, which has made it a little bit more transparent. And some of this black is going to blend into the pear or into the background, and that's going to be perfectly fine. It's just adding visual interest as we go. And I'm not filling in the background completely solid with this color. And I just keep loading my brush with some floating medium and this light gold color. And we're going to put some of that on here. And work some down here. Just with vertical strokes, applying this to the canvas. I am not really going to bother painting the edges of the canvas because I think this painting needs to be framed, and I would probably frame it in a nice fruit wood colored frame, which I think would be a nice complement to the warm overall tones of the painting. You could frame it however it suits your decor. Okay, I'm going to wipe my brush on a blue shop towel, and I want you to get in the habit of wiping your brush by pinching it between the shop towel. That's going to take the excess paint out of your brush, and it's also going to groom your brush back into a nice flat shape. Now I'm going to pick up some titanium white on the brush, and I'm just going to add in some white, and then we're going to blend that in. Again, just using the vertical strokes and softening those colors together. Pick up more white, add that in, and blend and soften it. But I'm not trying to create a smoothly blended color here. I do want to see some of my brush strokes. And again, I'm just doing this with vertical strokes, creating some tonal variations. Because the last thing we want is to have a boring background for this painting. We always want to try to create visual interest anywhere we can. And so I'm just adding this white to create some value changes. This isn't difficult painting. You just have to relax and kind of go with what you get. Actually really liking how some of this is smearing a little bit outside the lines of the pears, adding interest and creating yet another color in the background. I'm going to come over here and pick up a little bit of sap green on my dirty brush. I'm not adding any other gold or white to the brush. I just want to pick up a little bit of sap green, just kind of brush mix, kind of a light pale green color, and we're just going to begin to add some green into the background. And again, I'm just doing this with vertical brush strokes, and you can apply the paint using a heavier amount of pressure on the brush, and then we can lighten up the pressure to soften this color in. So I've added a little bit here, I've added some here, and I'm going to add a little bit over here just for repetition of color. So apply it with a firm pressure and then lighten up a little bit to soften it in. Again, not worrying if I have some brush marks that are visible. This area up here just looks a little too white to me, so I'm going to wipe my brush on my blue shop towel again, taking the excess paint off the brush, and I'm going to pick up some of my light gold color, and I'm just going to add some of that right here at the top and softening that in a little bit. Want to make sure that anywhere we have a transition of color, that it's a nice kind of smooth gradation, even though we are still seeing brush marks. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with the way this background looks, and you're going to have to begin to evaluate your painting as you're working on it. This little bit right here I've noticed bothers me a little bit, so just a light pressure, and we soften that away. Okay, so now would be a good time. I'm going to completely dry this so that I don't have to worry about getting that paint in my pears or getting my hands in it as I'm painting. So this is a good time to pause the video and let your background completely dry. We are back now with my background completely dry, and I wanted to mention to you all that the FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment has an excellent open time. And that's great if you're painting and blending and working with the paint. But when it comes time to letting it dry, if I were just to let that air dry, that could take hours. So while we were paused, I used a heat gun to dry this paint. Now you can use a heat gun, but make sure that you keep it moving and don't get it too close to the canvas. You could also use a hairdryer set on high and hot and keep moving that over the surface. Or if you have like a craft embossing heat gun, you can use that little tool as well. Just make sure that you keep the heat source moving and don't get it too close to the canvas, but that will help speed the drying time. So our background is nice and dry, and we're ready to start working on our pears. And I'm going to be painting on all three pears at the same time. And I want you to remember that pears are not just one color. Our pears are going to be yellow and green and red. So we're going to work some of those colors in, and we're going to be working in multiple layers. So we'll work for a little while, and then we'll stop and dry those layers and lock that into place before we continue to move on. Better to have a little less color than too much color when we get started. So I'm going to continue using my floating medium, which I have in my little jar here, my little bowl, and I'm going to dress my number 10 filbert brush with the floating medium, and I'm just going to pick up some yellow ochre on my brush. I've added some other colors to the palette, and we'll be calling those specific colors out as we use them. So I want to add some of the floating medium to the yellow ochre so that it's not completely opaque. So I'm going to start, and again, hold my brush near the end of the handle, and we're just going to begin to go right around the outside of the pear, and you can see how some of my colored pencil is bleeding in and making that edge darker, which I think is really lovely. And again, don't have your paint on your brush terribly solid. So we're going to take the excess color off the brush, and we're just going to begin to scrub some of this translucent yellow ochre in toward the inside of the pear. And I'm keeping those outside edges angular like we talked about at the beginning of the video. And just kind of scrub this along, patting and dabbing. Now I'm going to pick up some more of my translucent yellow ochre. If I need to, I can add more floating medium to the brush and thin out the paint here on my mixing mat. And we'll continue to kind of block in our pear. And you can see that this color is not solid. It's a nice translucent color, and we're just working this in. Dabbing, not worrying about any particular stroke or stroke direction. Just about getting some color onto the pears. Okay, so I'm going to leave it looking just like that for now, and I'm going to move on to the other pears, because we do have 3 Amigos here. So again, same technique, dressing my brush with floating medium and then picking up some yellow ochre, and we're going to come onto this pear, and again, keeping those angular outside edges. This is going to be the darkest and the most intense color of our entire painting right in this area. And we will continue to develop those dark areas as we move on through the painting. But right now, it's just scrubbing and dabbing some of the color on and making sure that the color is translucent. Because for these pears, we're not really making any really solid opaque colors on here until we get more toward the end of the painting. Hold that brush near the end of the handle so that you are forced to be more loose and fluid in your painting style. All right, pear number 2 blocked in with our translucent yellow ochre, and we're going to begin to work on our 3rd pear. Again, dress your brush in floating medium, then pick up yellow ochre, and we will begin on this little guy over here. And you all can probably hear how the brush is just really working this translucent color into the canvas. Because I'm not overloading the canvas with paint. Okay, now I'm going to take a bit of my blue shop towel. I don't need a whole towel. I'm just going to take a little bit of a blue shop towel, and I'm just going to wrap it around the end of my finger, and I'm going to come onto the pears, and I'm just going to kind of rub and soften where I think my highlights on these pears will be. That's just to take a little bit of this excess color off. You can move the shop towel till you get a clean area. Just taking out a little bit of the excess paint, and that's all we're doing with that, just kind of lightening up where our highlights are going to go. And this, I want to lock this in place, so once again I'm going to take my heat gun and just dry the pears so that my yellow ochre stays right where it is. We have our pears dried with our yellow ochre now locked into place, and we're going to continue to build the depth of color on our pears. I'm using my number 10 filbert brush, and I'm going to create a new mixture of a darker greenish yellow color. So I'm going to begin with yellow ochre, and to that I'm going to brush mix in some sap green, and then to tone this color down I'm going to add a little bit of red light. So just brush mixing all of this here on the palette, and you've got to make sure that you're paying attention that you have a nice, good balance between green and red. So this is looking a little too red, so I'm going to come back and add some green to that. And now I'm just going to wipe the excess paint off of my brush and come back and pick up some color. Add a little bit of floating medium to make sure that it's nice and transparent. Continuing to look at it and adjust the color as I think it needs to be adjusted. Probably going to add just a little bit more green to this. Okay, so now I've got this nice dull color, and I'm going to come over here on this pear and just begin to add a little bit of this extra nice dark shading color onto the pear. Add a little bit over here on the darker side of the pear. Then I'm going to wipe my brush off, and we're just going to begin to kind of scrub this olive color onto the pear. And you can scrub, you can dab, you can pat, anything you need to kind of move this color out so that you get a nice gradation of color. I think you can see that we're really starting to kind of change the overall color of that pear. I'm going to add a little bit more floating medium to my brush and pick up just a scant amount of color. Take the excess off of my brush, and then I'm going to kind of move a little bit more of this color in to create the curve or neck of the pear. So just bringing some of that darkness in, and now you can see that I've got an area of light up here and an area of light down here where the pear bulges a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to take that same color, and if I need to, I can mix a little bit more here on my palette. Again, it's yellow ochre plus sap green, and then to tone that color down, we're adding a little bit of red light and just brush mixing it here on the palette. Adding some floating medium to make it transparent. Then I'll knock the excess paint off of the brush, still using my number 10 filbert, and I'm going to come right along here and add some extra dark where this pear is casting a shadow. Wipe the excess off my brush and then just kind of soften this color out a little bit. If I'm moving too much color, then really pinch and wipe the excess paint off of the brush and come back, and you can soften this color easily. And add a little bit of floating medium to my brush, which will make it a little bit more transparent, and then just come back and just kind of tickle the edges just a little bit to soften that color into the pear. Again, scrubbing, dabbing, patting, whatever motion you need to do to move the color on your canvas. So I'm wiping the excess paint out of the brush, again grooming the brush to a nice flat shape before coming back and softening this color in. All right, I want to add a little bit of warmth to the right-hand side of this pear, so I'm mixing a little bit of red light and some yellow ochre together. And I'm going to add a little bit of medium yellow to that. So I'm kind of making a nice kind of soft orange color. And I'm going to add floating medium to that to make it more transparent. And I'm going to take the excess paint off of my brush because I don't need very much of this, but I do want to come over here and warm up this edge of the pear. So again, I'm going to pinch and wipe the excess paint out of the brush and then just kind of scrub and move this warm color into the pear. So we've got some nice cool shadowing going on over here. We've got more dark here where we're actually casting a shadow onto this pear, and now I've added some warmth over there. And I'm going to continue on with the warming of the pear, and we'll add a little bit of warmth right over here. And again, just kind of scrub that in, take the excess paint off my brush, and then soften this. And we'll add some sap green mixed with some floating medium, and just kind of what this olive color we had on our palette, just add some of that into it, just to tone the green down just a little bit. Take the excess paint off the brush, and we'll come over here and add a little bit of green to the pear. And then I'll take the excess paint out of the brush and begin to soften this into the pear. Where I kind of went outside the lines there, I'm not going to worry about that. That's not bothering me at all. So I want to have a loosely rendered painting. Okay, so now this pear has warm and cool on it. We've got warm and cool on this pear. This is a little bit cooler, but at the end we're going to come really warm that area up, creating some more contrast there. So let's take another moment and let's lock this layer of color in by drying it with either a hair dryer or a heat gun. And you can pause your video while we do that. And when we come back, we'll start adding some more colors to our pear. All right, we have dried and locked in that layer of color on our pears, and we are ready to really start making them look a little bit more yellow. So again, I'm still using my number 10 filbert brush, and I've not cleaned it out in water. You'll notice that I almost never clean my brushes in water while I'm painting. But you can see here on the mixing mat that there is some dirty color in the brush, and that's perfectly fine. But I'm going to pick up some medium yellow and mix that in with my floating medium and whatever colors were in the brush. And we are going to begin to add some yellow color to our pear. So you can see just how much more yellow that's starting to make this pear look. So again, the yellow, some floating medium, and we're adding yellow to the pear. And because I've not really toned this yellow down, it's a much more intense yellow because it's almost straight out of the bottle. And I think you can see it's really starting to make a difference in the overall color of the pears. And we'll do the same thing to the last pear. You can see what a difference it makes just adding this clear yellow or this clean yellow to the pear. And because we're adding so many layers to this, I'm applying very, very thin applications of paint to the surface. I don't want to have to wait a really long time for this to dry or to have to dry it excessively with the hair dryer or heat gun. I'm going to come back to the first pear that I worked on and yellow that guy up a little bit more. And these are really starting to come to life now with the addition of this bright, intense yellow color. I'm creating a mixture of medium yellow and yellow light here on the palette. And I'm going to add a little bit of floating medium to help make this color a little bit more transparent. And I'm going to take the excess color off of the brush. And then where I want my pears to be light, I'm going to come in and just add a little bit of this lighter yellow color. If it's not showing up real well, we can add some more yellow light to it and come back and just kind of scrub that on and soften it in. Just kind of spreading that color out a little bit more. And we're going to lock that yellow in and let it dry. So you can pause your video and dry your pears at this stage. Our pears are dry and that color layer is locked in, and we are now going to begin to create a little bit of an illusion of a reflection. And these are not actual realistic reflections. What I want to do is I want to carry some of the color from the pear down into the background and give the pear something to actually rest on before we put a little bit of a sit-down shadow onto our pears. So I'm going to continue to work with my number 10 filbert brush, and I'm going to dress the brush with some floating medium. And I'm just going to use that to kind of clean the color out of my brush a little bit because we had that light yellow in there. And I want to just add a little bit of floating medium underneath the pears. So I'm just going to brush a little bit of this on, and that's just going to give me a little something to work into. And you can see, because there was a little color in my brush, I'm getting a little bit of a yellow reflection here underneath the pears. But don't want you all to get too caught up in exactly what this is going to look like. I'm going to take some of that olive color that we initially darkened out the edges of our pears with, and we're going to put some of that right underneath the pear, and then we're just going to kind of scribble and soften that. If it gets to be a little too much, just take your finger and push that back up in there, and we're good with that start of a reflection there. And we'll do the same thing here, darkest right up next to the pear, and then we're just going to let a little bit of this kind of filter out to the outside. I'm going to wipe the brush, take the excess paint off of the brush, and then just a little scrubbing and softening here. Just to move that, and then that just seemed harsh there, so one of the best tools you have are your fingers to kind of soften that. And we'll do it one more time underneath the pear on the right hand side. Bringing some of that dark there and just letting that soften out a little bit. All right, now that's the beginning of our reflections. We're going to do a little bit more to that, but you can already see how that starts to allow the pear to have a place to actually be resting. Returning to the pears, we're going to add a little bit more intense color to the pear. So I'm going to start on the pear on the right, and I'm going to add a little bit more sap green and just a little bit of floating medium. So again, just mixing that here on the mixing mat. And we're just going to add, again, holding the brush at the base of the handle, and we're just going to add some of this to the right hand edge of the pear. Then I'm going to wipe the excess paint off the brush, and I'm just going to kind of move that color toward the inside of the pear. What I do not want to do is to have this green color the same width and the same intensity all around the pear. I want it to have some variety in shape. So you can see it's very thin right here, and we're letting it be much wider here toward the bottom of the pear. And I'm just going to continue to kind of scrub and soften that out a little bit. Because my paint underneath is completely dry, it's not going to re-wet or interfere with my painting on top of it in any way. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more sap green, and I'm just going to intensify the color a little bit more right here, and just let that trail off a little bit. Take the excess paint off the brush and soften that in. And I'm going to do the same thing again, picking up extra sap green. And I'm just going to really punch this area up right over here. So I've added that color on. Now I'm going to wipe the excess paint off of my brush, and I'm just going to soften, just messing with the edges of that a little bit, leaving this really, really strong green over here on the right-hand edge of the pear. So I'm going to leave this pear alone for the time being, and I'm going to start to work on both of these pears together. So I'm going to take a little bit of my original olive mixture and some more sap green. And I'm going to add this on the back pear here to help start to create a little bit more of a shadow. And again, I'm just going to apply this color and then take the excess paint off of my brush, and we're just going to soften this into the pear. Don't want it to have the same width all the way around. So that's looking pretty nice. And then we're going to repeat that a little bit over here on the bottom edge of the pear and a little bit up this right-hand side. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to now move on to the pear that's to the front of the design. And because this is going to be the lighter side of my pear and this is going to be the darker side, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to darken this area a little bit more. And what we're going to end up creating is what is known as a lost edge. So we're basically going to lose the edge of the dark side of this pear where it's casting a shadow on this pear, and it's going to become a very soft edge that it's very difficult to see where one pear ends and the other one begins. But that creates interest in our painting because we'll have a lost edge here, and then we've got very crisp sort of found edges and other places of our painting. So let's dry this so that we can continue to build layers on here. So we lock in each layer as we work and once we're happy with it. If you're not quite pleased with the way your pears look, continue to work on it because your paint will allow you that time to work on it. But once you're happy, then let's dry it with our hair dryer or heat gun to lock this layer in place. I have dried those layers and they are locked in place. And I want to mention to you that we seem to be pausing and drying these layers quite a bit in this lesson. The FolkArt Pure Artist Pigment is a very versatile paint, and in previous lessons we've used it as it comes out of the bottle to just apply paint and blend it. We've also used it with a palette knife to create some very thick impasto work, and in today's lesson we're applying it in thin transparent layers. And because we are applying it in multiple layers, that's why we need to pause and dry it a little bit more than we have in any other lesson that we've done. But it's just because this paint allows you to do so many different things, and I want to share with you just how versatile this paint is. So once again, pears are dry, and we are going to continue to develop some darker areas on our pears. So I have added to my palette a couple of new colors. So I'm going to brush mix some sap green with a little bit of burnt umber, which is a nice rich brown color. And I'm also going to add a small amount of Payne's Gray, which is a very, very dark blue-gray color. When it's just out on the palette, it looks like it's black, but I'll show you, if you thin that out, you can see that it's a really beautiful blue-gray color. And so it's a really versatile color, and I really like to use it. So I'm darkening my sap green with a little burnt umber and a little bit of Payne's Gray. I'm going to also make it transparent by the addition of a small amount of floating medium. And I'm going to take the excess paint off of my brush just by wiping it on a blue shop towel. And we're going to come in here and add it where we want to begin to make our darkest darks on this painting. So we're just going to dab that on. Take the excess paint off of the brush and just kind of soften that color out a little bit. And I'm also going to add that same color over here on the dark side of the pear that's in the front. And again, just kind of scrub that color out a little bit. I'm going to add more Payne's Gray to my mixture. I'm going to add more burnt umber to the mixture. And I'm going to also add just a little bit of red light to tone that color down even more. And we're going to come back onto the pear here, and we're going to add even more dark color. And we're just going to soften that in a very little bit. So that you can see we're creating values that are very close together. I'm now going to pinch and wipe really a lot of that excess color out of my brush. And I'm just going to soften this edge just a little bit more. And as I soften it, I'm also pushing some of that color back so that I'm creating an even darker value right where the front pear is casting a little bit of a shadow onto the back pear. And at this point, I really want to lock this in because I want to make this even darker. And because my paint is wet, it's going to be harder to add another layer of color on there. So we're going to pause momentarily, and we're going to dry and lock that layer into place. Our dark that we just put on there, we have dried that, and that is now locked in place. And we're going to go even darker now by adding some more Payne's Gray and a little burnt umber to our brush. And I'm going to come right next to the top pear, and you can see just how dark that Payne's Gray and burnt umber is. So we've really established that on the shadow area of the pear. And I'm just softening that into the pear a little bit so that I don't have a really harsh line. Now, we're going to start on the pear that's in front, and I want to just create that very dark edge. And then I'm going to take the excess paint off of my brush just by pinching it between the blue shop towel, and I'm going to soften that into the front pear a little bit. Now you can see how we've really lost that division between the two pears, which is great because we've created the darkest point of our painting so far, and that's really where your eye is focusing, and that's what we want right now because these two pears are the most important pears in the painting. So I'm going to really wipe the brush out now, and we're going to come back to our reflections, and we're going to add a little bit of a sit-down shadow. And by sit down shadow, I mean that is the shadow that the object casts when it's actually resting on the surface. So we're going to come right underneath the pears and add a little bit of the dark color that was on my brush, which was Payne's Gray and Burnt Umber. I'm just adding that right up next to the pear and then just softening that color a little bit. And I can come back and I can add a little bit more green into that mix. And just for some variety, we're going to add a little bit of green over here into this reflection, and maybe a little bit right in here. I'm going to pick up some straight Payne's Gray and add just a little bit of burnt umber to it. I'm not adding any floating medium to this because I want my paint to be more opaque. And I'm just going to come in here. Now I am holding the brush more like a pencil this time because I need to be a little bit more accurate. But I'm just going to come in right underneath the pear and add a really dark little bit of a sit-down shadow. And I'll do it here on this pear, just creating that really, really dark area. And again, we'll do it on this pear here. Now it's not all the way under the entire pear, just a little bit in the middle. And I think that's going to be quite enough to make it look like our pears are sitting down on a surface. Just soften that a tiny little bit. All right, now I'm not going to clean my brush in water, but what I am going to do is basically clean it with some floating medium. So I'm going to pick up some floating medium and just on my shop towel, just kind of rub and scrub the brush a little bit and then pinch it to get the excess color out of the brush. I don't really want to thin my paint down by cleaning it in water, but just a little bit of the floating medium and working it on a blue shop towel will get the excess dark color out of my brush, and we're going to start building up some highlights. So I'm pinching my brush and grooming it back into shape, and I'm going to pick up some medium yellow and some yellow light. And this time I'm not going to add any floating medium to this because I want the paint to be more opaque. And we're just going to start to brush on a little bit of this yellow color where I want to develop the highlights. And I'm doing this because I don't want my lighter highlights to be too chalky. So I'm giving them a little bit of a yellow base. And I'm going to pick up some more yellow light. Again, not adding any floating medium. And we're going to begin to just dab on some yellow light. And I think you can see really nicely here that we're starting to develop a highlight. You can really see it here. I'm just going to soften those edges out a little bit, add my yellow light highlight, and again, just soften the edges a little bit. Apply the color with firm pressure and then soften it using a much lighter pressure on the brush. Wiping my brush thoroughly on my blue shop towel, and I'm going to now take some yellow light and I'm going to add a little bit of titanium white to this to make that yellow color even lighter and brighter. Maybe add just a tiny bit of medium yellow to give that color a little bit more warmth, but it is much lighter in value. And I'll take the excess paint off the brush, and then we'll come back on here and develop a brighter highlight. by applying the paint with a firm pressure and then softening the outside edges of the highlight using a lighter pressure on the brush. I'm going to do the same thing on the other two pairs. Begin by applying the highlight with a firm pressure and then take the excess paint off the brush and using a light pressure, soften that highlight. Again, firm pressure to apply the highlight and light pressure to soften the edges. Firm pressure to apply the highlight and light pressure just to kind of soften or tickle those edges a little bit to create a bit of a softened, diffused highlight. And come back on here, apply the highlight with pressure, take the excess paint off of my brush, and then begin to just soften the edge. I'm going to come back to the original pair where I started, and I want to brighten that highlight a little bit more. So again, apply pressure to apply the highlight, and then soften the edges using a much lighter pressure on the brush. And you can continue to adjust this as you see that you need to on your painting. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with the way that looks, so I'm just going to leave that alone. And I'm now going to shift to a script liner brush. And a script liner brush has very, very long bristles, and I prefer that because it holds a little bit more paint than a regular length liner brush. And I'm going to load my brush with some floating medium and some burnt umber and a little bit of Payne's Gray mixed into that because I want to make that color even darker. And we're going to begin to paint the stems of the pears. So I'm getting my brush loaded with this color, and we're just going to paint in the stem of the pear, and it's got a little bit wider top knot to it. And what you don't want to do is to spend a lot of time painting these little stems. Just going to get the color on there and that little top knot. Because the stems of the pears are not the important part of the painting. Darken that right down there where it actually touches the pear. And I'm just doing that by adding a little extra paint. Okay, so the stems of the pears don't need any more work done to them. They're perfectly fine just like that. Again, don't spend all of your time painting the stem of a pear. So you've got some more fun stuff to do. So I'm wiping out my brush pretty thoroughly, and I want to build in a little bit of what some artists called rogue color, which is a color that we just haven't used all over the place, but it's going to add some visual interest. So I've picked up some red light on my brush, and I'm taking the excess color off on a blue shop towel. And I want to come right in here, and on the area of the painting that's the main focus, I'm just going to begin to blush this pear a little bit with some red light, creating a little bit of a warm area there. And it's a very small amount of paint on the brush, so there's a small amount of paint on the canvas. And then I'm going to come back in and add a little bit more red with a firm pressure. Take the excess paint off the brush and then soften that color out, just feathering the edges a little bit. And now we've created a color contrast between our green and red, and we've created some more interest there on that pear. And I think that's what this painting needed, is a little bit brighter interest there, because we've got our nice lost edge, but I want to focus our main viewer attention in this area of the painting. So now what's left to do is to put some final highlights on our pears, and I'm going to do that using a small trowel blade palette knife. So this is my small trowel blade palette knife, and I'm going to load the back side of the knife with some titanium white, and we are going to flick some highlights onto the pears. And this is kind of where you draw a deep breath, because you get basically one good chance to add a nice highlight, and you hope it lands just exactly where you want it and how you want it to look. So here we go. We're just going to add a nice white highlight onto the pear. Don't go back and try to mess with it, because you'll mess it up. You just want to put it on and let it go. So there we have our Three Amigos. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that you learned a lot about creating layers of color, and those are techniques that you can use in any sort of still life you're painting, regardless of what kind of fruit it is. So join me next time when we'll be doing a floral painting of flowers in a chartreuse vase.